The statements expressed in the following program are those of the speaker. They do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the sponsor, the hosts, and/or OLAS Media.
OLAS Media.
My authority is born on 40 years of experience in the system. The political mess that we have today, where people they stop talking to each other. There's always a bad apple. There's bad lawyers, there's bad doctors, there's bad nurses, there's bad auto mechanics. There are things that the public isn't aware of that the public needs to know. Organized crime, it's cartels, it's gangs, and it's a serious problem. Elections ought to be decided when the most people vote.
Welcome to the Politic Deli with Dan Howard.
Thank you for joining us on this special edition of Politic Deli with Dan Howell. I'm Chad Peace, legal advisor to the Independent Voter Project, filling in for Dan Howell. This special episode of Politic Deli is really a special one. We have guest host, Assemblymember David Alvarez, former Director of Finance Steve Peace. We have Senate Minority Leader Brian Jones, and Juan Hernandez, who is a binational entrepreneur, to talk about Independent Voter Project's conference, Make It with Mexico. Well, this conference really has one overriding question. Why are we doing business with countries half a world away, often adversarial countries, when the United States has a good friend and neighbor right here in Mexico, where we can do a lot of the very same manufacturing, production, and business with people we call our friends, our amigos? So we wanted to bring this show to talk a little bit about the issues that'll be discussed at this conference. We wanted to bring those from perspectives that are both Democrat, Republican. We have legislators participating from multiple parties in Mexico. And the whole point is putting out policy that's good policy, not because it's partisan policy, because it makes sense. If we're going to be friends with our neighbors down south, and Mexico is going to be friends with their neighbors up north, we got to ask some simple questions. Why aren't we doing basic things that can have massive implications, massive benefits, I should say, to the economies of both countries? They're win-win situations. That's the discussion these folks want to have. How do we do things that are win-win for Mexico and the United States? So I hope you enjoy this special episode. Let's make it with Mexico.
Hi, welcome to Politic Deli. I am David Alvarez, an Assembly member and your special guest host for today. I'm excited to be here to talk about this region which I grew up in, that I now have the honor to represent in our state capital of Sacramento. We'll have a series of interviews with people who have that similar experience of living on both sides of the border and experiencing the great culinary, cultural, economic, and all the diversity that this region has to offer, and the importance of Mexico, particularly Baja California, with our state of California. I'm really pleased to be here with this Make It in Mexico series. We're going to be talking to a few guests about the California-Mexico relationship, and I'm really excited that we're able to share this with so many people today. So I am a proud San Diegan, born and raised. I've been here my whole life. My parents were immigrants to this country from Mexico, so I've lived here my entire life. I now get to go to Sacramento on a weekly basis to represent basically from the barrio communities, the historic Mexican-American communities in San Diego, to San Isidro, the border with Mexico. And so it's a great opportunity to serve, to represent a diverse community, a lot of immigrants, a lot of longtime San Diegans, and now I get to have an opportunity to share with other people about the importance and the significance of the San Diego-Tijuana binational region, our mega region as we refer to. So it's really an honor to be able to share with other people why this region is so important, why we believe in this region so much, how the economy of this region is really tied between Mexico and California, why Mexico continues to be our largest trading partner here in California, and as I've been in Sacramento and talking to a lot of corporate folks and individuals and companies, more and more all the time I learn about a presence from one of these corporate members in Mexico. And so we'll be talking more about that, about what that means, how we create jobs, why we have 130,000 people who cross every single day across the border to work, to do business, who live here, who live on the other side of the border, who just go out for fun, who go down like we do in my family, go have dinner, my wife and I to go have a drink, spend the weekend. The significance of that to California, and also the significance of the historical trends of, for example, students who cross the border on a regular basis. More and more Americans that are living on the Mexican side of the border, obviously working on this side of the border. So all of that is going to be really, really exciting and important information that we'll be able to talk about. But also we want to talk about the commerce and the trucks and the port of entry in Otay Mesa, which is a significant port of entry, the most significant in California, where exports and imports, over 4,000 trucks on average on a daily basis, cross back and forth. All of those are important, significant factors in our region, in our economy, in our way of living. And Make It with Mexico is going to be an opportunity for more people to learn. It's going to be important for others who aren't from this region to understand, and for those of us who are from the region to really display and be proud of who we are and why we're here. So stay with us here on Politic Deli. We have a lot more guests and information, a lot more to share with you here today.
Attacking the podcast world this fall. From the original creators, Costa Dillon and Steve Peace. And based on the true legendary cult classic, Olus Media presents
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Attack.
For the first time, hear the truth behind the scenes. Accounts from the writer, actor, and those who made Killer Tomatoes possible.
Did somebody mention Misfits? No.
I certainly didn't expect to crash a helicopter cost more than the entire cost of the movie. But it made for a great visual.
Get over here. How bad is it?
Oh, sir, I definitely don't think it'll fly again.
I'm not talking about that, you wiener. What about the tomatoes?
Oh, well, we
finally learn to details behind how the book came about.
And they contacted us, said they wanted to novelize it. I looked at some of the other things Jeff had written, and I was impressed. I thought he did a good job. And we said, okay, go for it.
To learn more, visit KillerTomatoes.com and subscribe to the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes podcast, coming this fall to Olus Media.
Tomatoes.
Well, our first guest today is Juan Hernandez Sr. It is really an honor to have him. He is one of the 130,000 people who cross on a regular basis between San Diego and Tijuana. He is a businessman. He's a leader of business associations in the past, civically involved on both sides of the border, and it's really an honor to have you, Juan Manuel Hernandez Sr., here with us to talk about our border region, your lived experience, your family's lived experience, and what you see for the future. So welcome today.
Thank you, David. My pleasure to be with you. My honor.
Thank you. It's great to have you. So our series today is Make It with Mexico, and you have a lot of experience with that, so I want to hear about that. But before we hear about that specific experience, I want to hear about your story, how you came to San Diego, the San Diego-Tijuana region, what you've been doing in the region, and anything you want to share with us.
Well, born and raised in Tijuana, came to the U.S. over about 25 years ago. I raised all my children in the Chula Vista, San Diego area. I've been involved in the manufacturing industry since I was 26. Started working for a small company by the name of Made in Mexico, pretty similar to the event Make It with Mexico. It was a shelter program. We help U.S. companies come into Mexico and establish their business in there. Worked with them for about 5 years. Then I moved to Sony. I spent 9 years at Sony. I was make it all the way to vice president of administration and finance. Sony back on those days was the biggest maquiladora in Mexico. It was named by Expansion magazine, which is similar to Business Week in the U.S. It was named the biggest maquiladora in Mexico. We were exporting over $1 billion worth of TVs and computer monitors. As I said, I was in charge of administration and finance. We have over 7,000 people in Baja. And we were very proud of that operation because we were not a regular assembly line. Out of the 5 key components of the TVs back on those days, were made in Tijuana. Only the CRT was being made in either Japan or San Diego in the Rancho Bernardo facility. So we grew that business all the way, as I said, to $1 billion. So all the TVs that were being sold in the U.S. and Latin Americas were being manufactured in Tijuana. We got very lucky also because we got into with the implementation of the NAFTA agreement. So back on those days, imagine 1994, we have this big peso devaluation, which cut all the Mexican manufacturing costs by half. We have the Clinton economics, so everything was being purchased, and we got NAFTA, no duty on it. So I mean, the business was booming, exploding. Right after that, I moved to Philips. I went to Torreon, Mexico, with my whole family. The only part that we didn't make in Tijuana was the CRT, as I said. So Philips was establishing a $220 million operation in Torreon, Coahuila, and they invited me to participate in there. We moved there for a couple of years to set up the plant. I was getting into my 40s back on those times, and I started getting, I guess, this kind of a situation where I have to set up my business on my own. So I started thinking, what am I going to do? And I say, well, not finance, because that's too much competition in that field. So we say, hey, the future of the industry is related to logistics and to subcontracting. So what is the concept that it will cross the two concepts altogether? And that was the 3PL, the third-party logistics provider. So start thinking about that business. I told to my wife, I say, if we don't do it right now, if we don't get independent right now, later it's going to be late because the children are going to grow up. We have to pay for college tuitions and things like that. So it was the time to take the risk. So I quit Philips. We came back to the area and established what is called now Grupo Loginam, Logística Integral de América. I got into this partnership with what are nowadays my partners after 20 years. So we have over 600,000 square footage of business. We provide 3PL business to the majority of the maquiladoras in Baja. Last year we sold over $18 million worth of service. We also started 2 additional business. We do clean laundering services for the maquiladora, for the medical industry. We're going to open a new facility in Mexicali next month, August the 1st, and we also done scanning services.
Well, let me just ask you about a few of those things, because you just talked about a lot of aspects of your history and your success, and I think it's important to put it all into context. You are what we call a fronterizo, a border person, someone who all of those experiences, if it weren't for being on the border, you wouldn't have had. You wouldn't have been able to work at a maquila at the levels that you did, the logistics work, and now your businesses that have sort of started as a result of that. But let me start with the first thing that you mentioned, because I think it'd be interesting just to hear more about Made in Mexico. Which is where you started. Tell me more about Made in Mexico. You said you worked with several companies. Mm-hmm. We heard you mention Sony and Philips that you later worked for, but I think oftentimes when I talk to people about what happens in the border region, you say those names and people's ears perk up because they don't believe that all the televisions that Sony made in the 90s were made in Tijuana, right? So tell me about the other companies that you had experience with prior to that.
Made in Mexico, for instance? Yes. Well, Made in Mexico, if people are not familiar with the shelter program, basically, let's say you want to make a product in Mexico. You have a very successful company in the U.S. It can be a big company, it can be a small company, and you want to start doing your manufacturing in Mexico. So you know about the product, but you don't know how to run a business in Mexico. So the shelter program will help you with that. They will establish the maquiladora program, which is pretty much a duty-free importation program. You bring the stuff into Mexico, you manufacture and you export it back to either the U.S. or any other country without paying the duties. But you don't know anything about human resources. You don't know anything about tax situations. You don't know anything about import-export activities. So a shelter company will help you with that. They will do all the hiring. They will run the operation on the administration side. So you can focus on the process to manufacture the product in there. Then eventually you become independent. And you start establish your own business from all the business perspective. But on the meanwhile, they can help you out with that.
Yeah. So any products or companies that you can share that work with you during in that program of Made in Mexico?
That is a very successful company as we speak right now. Rainbird, they made the sprinklers. We helped Rainbird, I would say it was 89, 90, back on the siglo pasado, they call it, established their business in there.
So then you went from the Tijuana, San Diego region to another border region in Coahuila. Which is, people forget that the border is from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico and Texas.
All the way through.
So we have a big region, and that region is another important binational region. But tell me, if you could, more about your experience in establishing your business in logistics, because that's another thing that wouldn't have happened in your life had it not been for you being on the border. It's a very unique business operation. Tell me about that and how it's led to other successes. You mentioned you're starting a couple other companies.
If you analyze, David, the maquiladora industry has been in Mexico for over 50 years. There is a lot of sites operation that can become very successful on providing services to these big companies. For instance, one of my biggest clients right now is Medtronic. I've been providing service to Medtronic for over 20 years.
Can you tell us what Medtronic does, for those who don't know?
All stents, all the cardiovascular pumps, all the state-of-the-art cardiovascular providers that a company can make. One of the things that we say very proudly is that if you go into one of those big maquiladora companies, you close your eyes and you get in there and you open your eyes, you can be in any place in the world, State-of-the-art facilities. Right now, the reason we're establishing in Mexicali is to provide service to Intuitive Surgical. Intuitive Surgical, it's building up a 1 million square foot facility in Mexicali. Okay. They make the robot, the Da Vinci, the one that operates for prostate cancer, for instance. So once again, you get into those facilities and you can be in any place in the world.
Well, and what's interesting about that is that whether it's a cardiovascular procedure or in this case, as you mentioned, with this robot, prostate, you could be anywhere in the United States, frankly, anywhere in the world, and potentially be using those products. Right?
Yeah, that's pretty much the situation, So we have the different phases of Mexico. In one phase, you see those state-of-the-art facilities, and then you have all the, see all the challenges that we still have as a country.
Tell me about so someone might hear about this and they think, well, okay, that's good. There's jobs and things are being made in Mexico, and the company, the production is creating jobs in Mexico. But tell me about you live and your family is on the U.S. side. How does the United States side or the California side in this specific region with Mexicali or Tijuana, how does our side of the border benefit? Because some people don't see that.
Well, first of all, there is a lot of employment that it's being generated for people who live in the U.S. and cross the border on a day-to-day basis to work on the Mexican facilities. There's also the support site that typically runs, what is called the twin plant old concept assembly, where you have a lot of supporting on the U.S. side as well. That create a lot of jobs, and you also have the complementary of the two countries. Getting the best of each one and being able to combine and get the best from both worlds, as we said.
So what you're talking about products that maybe some components are made in the Mexican side, but other components are made or perhaps the finished product is on the U.S. side? No,
I'm basically saying, all the supporting side that you need from a logistics standpoint on the U.S. side. For instance, going back into Sony, we were making all the TVs, from A to Z. but we still have a lot of support on the U.S. side to push those products into the right market. So we become complementary. We become really complementary.
So someone might think...
And very competitive as well.
When someone might think, well, it's just the trucks that take the TVs. But no, right? It's people who sell the TVs.
Who sell the TVs, the marketing people, all the support side that you need for running such a business.
And to have a successful product. Mm-hmm. So now we get to this conference that we are talking about with this series with Make It With Mexico. And I wanted to hear about your interest, what your thoughts are on having a conference like this and highlighting and trying to focus on what certainly your lived experience of being in a binational region. Tell me, what do you think about a conference like this?
Well, there are wonderful opportunities, for being combined Mexico and the U.S. We've been hearing about the nearshoring, all the companies who are right now in China, they have to move the product somewhere else. That's a beautiful opportunity both to Mexico and the United States. But we need legislation. We need people from both sides of the border who are working on the government to being able to understand all those needs, those necessities, and being able to combine their efforts to make this, a more as successful as it is right now.
What do you think is one of the things, like if you could just share with people one thing that you said, getting government to be helpful, what's one thing that you would, if you have a magic wand and could just wave it and so people could understand, what do you think could really be impactful and helpful?
If I go back to my Sony times, David, let's say 1995, where we ambition back on those times was what is called a seamless border, where I'm going to be able to cross my products without having to stop at border. And I'm just, thinking virtually from a point of view. So expedite the border, as simple as that, from both sides of the countries. I think that will be key. It's not only the nearshoring, it's the e-commerce opportunities that we are having. But when you do an e-commerce, you have to deliver the product to your client the next day. Mm-hmm. And you have the border in the middle, that's quite a hassle. Yeah. So, if I can tell you one simple thing is being able to cross the border on an expeditious way.
In a safe and expeditious way.
Safe and expedition, both for merchandise and for people as well.
That's right. Have you been involved with any projects like this one to try to highlight the significance of our border regions to be able to maybe one day get to that vision that you have?
My whole life. My whole life, it's been good sometimes, it's been bad sometimes. When we need what is called policy on industry development, where you combine the two countries all together. And sometimes the government people do not talk, do not understand. They've taken the decisions either in the DC or Mexico City, and they don't have a clue of the necessities of the border.
Yeah, I've always thought it was so fascinating that we're so far physically from Washington, D.C., and the rhetoric that comes from Washington, D.C. is about the border is something that we don't really see, and certainly in business isn't helpful. But Mexico, Ciudad de Mexico, the capital of Mexico, is also very far from Tijuana.
Very far from Tijuana.
We suffer from some of the same ailments. So keeping up the message and the drumbeat is something that I know we've tried to do for many years.
There is a famous saying from a former governor of Baja, Ernesto Rufo. He will say, nos atienden, pero no nos entienden. Mm-hmm. They attend us, but they don't understand us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. Well, and you were talking about something really fascinating. We see the labels, whether it's on clothing, attire, many other things, toys, made in China. That's usually what we see. You were talking about potentially a vision where, and you said the word nearshoring, which mm-hmm. Might be new to some people, but mm-hmm. the idea of bringing more to Mexico, nearshoring to Mexico, bringing it closer to the United States. How is it that we could maybe have more toys made in Mexico versus made in China?
Well, we have big industries in the past. Mattel was in Tijuana. It was a big operation, 4,000 or 5,000 people. I don't know if they still exist, or they have a smaller operation. But I would be very proud if my grandchildren will be playing with toys. If eventually I get grandchildren, by the way. But I mean, they will be playing with the toy design and manufacture in my country.
So if it's not toys, it's maybe apparel, it's maybe sunglasses. I don't know, any number of things. What would it take? We have the NAFTA 2.0, or what we call it differently in Mexico and in the United States, USMCA versus in Mexico it's called the. What is it? USMCA?
You said what's that? It's not Telecan anymore.
No, that was the original version.
That's the original version.
Yeah.
The TEMEC.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But that's basically NAFTA 2.0 that was reauthorized. And with that, besides that, I should say, or ask, what would it take in addition to that, in addition to what you mentioned earlier in terms of the more seamless border? What are some of the maybe more implementable things that maybe we could see in the next few years to really make this change happen?
Well, we have to keep working on the Mexican side, as I say, creating public policy, real public policy, that will, have a vision for the next 20, 25 years or so. We have to get more resources and infrastructure. Mexico cannot compete only on being close to the U.S. We have to compete on infrastructure, on better universities, on all those things that you really need to make a world-class manufacturing. I think that's what we have to work into it. That would be my vision on how we can combine into it.
You mentioned Mexico has some work to do, but for this to really work, as a U.S. legislator myself and former council member, and having been through multiple delegation visits to Mexico City, to Washington, D.C., we also need the American counterparts, the United States counterparts of the Mexican officials to do their part, whether it's in California or federal representatives. How can those individuals be helpful to have those conversations, that communication with the Mexican counterparts that you just mentioned, need to be more actively involved?
I think they have to sympathize with Mexico. They have to understand the needs, and they have to understand the benefits of working together. Right now I'm seeing some kind of a competition, should I call it, and saying, hey, Mexico is no good for the United States, and we have to isolate ourselves and become a silo on anything that the country will need. And I think that's not the right vision. So we have to develop the right vision altogether, and seeing, that the combination, as NAFTA, it's pretty much calling into it, to being able to complete ourselves and being able to be more competitive as it relates to the rest of the world.
You make a really good point. So we do hear a lot of American politicians saying "Made in America," right? Yet only a couple of years ago, especially under an administration here in the United States, this USMCA was agreed upon, which the underlying intent of it is that there would be trade between, especially expedited trade between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. So that comes at a really comes to head with each other in a really strange way for me as an American politician, because yes, you obviously want to have the jobs created in America, in the U.S. So if you have more made in America, you can do that. But the reality is that not everything will be made in America, and that's why something like the USMCA, the treaty, the agreement, the trade agreement makes sense. But I think you make a really good point. What do you say to that conflict that exists between our trade agreement and what you just pointed out, rightfully, I believe, that this silo of thinking about just the U.S.?
Well, trade is a fact. It's happening as we speak right now. You got to look into the automobile industry. Majority of the automobiles are being made in Mexico. I think it's just the politics thing that is hurting us. These concepts of isolation, as I say, and the made in American thing. Well, America is the whole country. I mean, the whole continent. I mean, it's just avoid the politics a little bit if it can be done. And try to see, how can we combine and get the most out of it.
Yeah, I think it's acknowledging our strengths. We each have strengths, right? And if you think of it that way.
And minimizing our weaknesses, right?
That's right. That's right. So I want to thank you for your time. Really been very generous in sharing your personal story. I'm very hopeful about the future of this region. That's why I am involved with Made with Mexico. That is why I am involved with a lot of border related work across the U.S.-Mexico border, the Border Legislators Conference, all sorts of things. Can you tell me why you have hope about the future of this region?
I think, I was reading an article about a week ago from a famous Mexican writer. He was basically saying that in the next 15 years, Mexico is going to become the 10th largest economy of the world. And that's without any effort being made. Mm-hmm. Why? Because we want to sell to the United States. As simple as that, right? So that's the way I see it, We just have to keep alive, and I think those things are going to happen. We can explode if we combine, those strengths and minimize those weaknesses as we speak. But Mexico and the U.S. are together, and we are being together for history and going to be together in the future. Let's make our lives easier, I would say.
Looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Well, if you want to learn more about Made It with Mexico, please visit independentvoterproject.org. We have more information about the conference. Well, we have more conversations just like this one. So stay with us here on Politic Deli. We have a lot more guests and information, a lot more to share with you here today.
I'm Chad Peace. I'm very proud to be the legal strategist for the Independent Voter Project. For over 12 years, I've been proud that, as an organization, while everyone else is focused on the two-sided hyperbolized debate, Independent Voter Project has put their head down and do things like file initiatives and lawsuits that create structural change that actually elevates the voting rights for voters who are sick and tired of the two-party debate.
All right, we are back with our next guest, and it's really an honor to have here former legislator, senator, assembly member from the state of California, who's been a thought leader. I got to know him through my work as a city council member previously, but definitely a leader in the community, served in various capacities and roles in our state, and it's really an honor to have former Senator Steve Peace. Steve, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, David.
It's really good to have you. I'm looking forward to our conversation about your thoughts. Actually, something we haven't talked about a lot. We've talked about a lot of issues over the years, but the border hasn't been something, the border region and our regional economy and the strength of where we are is not something I've actually had a lot of chance of talk to you about. So I'm looking forward to that. But why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your previous experience briefly, and then I want to ask you about your experience on the border. I do want to talk about the Binational Health Plan because that was your legislation that made that possible. We'll talk a little bit more about what that is. But tell me more about you before we get started on that.
Well, at the tender age of 29, I had the luxury of representing the entire border between California and Mexico. And I had that district that included all of Imperial County and San Diego County's border for a decade. And then for another decade in the Senate, continued to represent the San Diego portion of the district formally, and frankly, informally, continued to represent folks in Imperial. Once you have the opportunity to be a part of the Imperial Valley community, you are embraced permanently, and if you're smart, you embrace them permanently. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. More than their share of problems, but people who are literally the definition of the salt of the earth, folks who have long ago learned how to live together in a dynamic and diverse community with empowerment across the board. I was there as things changed in terms of power in the valley, and there was a lot of interaction in terms of relationships across the border from the beginning. The healthcare legislation that you make reference to really came as a result of changes in health care law in California that had the potential well, it didn't have potential, it did disrupt natural business type relationships that have evolved, in which people got health care on both sides of the border, and quite naturally insurance products evolved and healthcare clinics and whatnot evolved to deal with the reality that people live and work on both sides of the border, and that a healthcare system, if it's going to be reflective of the needs of the community in a border community, by definition can't end at this artificial line on a map.
So you've had a really unique opportunity to represent the border region. So you know about the environmental challenges, the water challenges. When you're talking about healthcare, you came up with legislation on a very unique, I would say, solution, a true binational solution to a problem that was being faced by the people who you represented. You allowed individuals who worked on the U.S. side of the border for the employers to provide healthcare at an affordable rate with a healthcare provider on the Mexican side of the border. You were able to not only increase access to healthcare, which I think is critical, but healthcare that was culturally competent for a lot of people, I think. Tell me about how that experience, and maybe any of your other experiences on binational issues, have helped you shape your view of what the border is like, and how you've expressed your learned point of view to other people throughout the state in your leadership capacities that you had over the years.
Yeah, I don't know how much of this perception I have. You say, how did I come to these things and how did I see them? I don't know how much of my perception was naive as a consequence of age or temperament, but you take the healthcare bill, to me it was like kind of obvious, and I was shocked when it was controversial. The resistance in the insurance community, in the healthcare delivery community, which is really what surprised me. People that were in the business of providing healthcare were maniacally opposed. And some folks reflected that opposition simply pretty transparently as a competitive issue. Others, through probably a combination of actual belief and self-interest and seeing their part of the elephant, reflected on concerns about the quality of care. But I actually thought when I first encountered what was happening that this was not going to be complicated. It was an obvious. I thought it was just an oversight systemically, and we'll just go in and get the bureaucracy straightened out. And it turned into a knockdown, drag-out fight. And but for the coincidence of some other San Diego folk in important positions as well in the legislature and the time there, and I had the good fortune at various times to serve when Wadi Detta was a state senator and who I followed, and Bob Frazee and on the Republican side, and we had an extremely cooperative bipartisan delegation in San Diego where Republicans and Democrats worked closely together for San Diego's benefit. We all had both individual business relationships in many cases on the other side of the border, and developed political relationships. And one of the things, interestingly, that had helped in this case was I had a very high profile in calling attention to the border sewage problem as a result of a 60 Minutes show, which Diane Sawyer came down to the border, visited both the New River in Mexicali and coming across Calexico and into Imperial County, as well as the Tijuana River Valley. And that was what led to, incidentally, ultimately the construction of the first international border sewage facility, which then here we are today, 20 years plus later, and again, we have another, to me, unbelievably simple problem that everybody gets together and they have big meetings and they talk about, there's nothing miraculous about it. This is engineering. Stuff runs downhill. We're downhill. Tijuana's outgrown its own infrastructure. There's a certain amount of work that would make things a lot easier if there was improvements, and we could help with those improvements in that infrastructure. But fundamentally, the the engineering is already there. The plant is already there. It simply needs more capacity. And that should have been updated 10, 15 years ago. And it's why it hasn't is a mystery to me. But that profile that came as a result of my early focus on the border environmental problems, I know is really what carried the momentum for me in terms of turning the tide in Sacramento, where this was it might as well have been on another planet, let alone dealing with another.
I chuckle a little bit because I find myself in the seat that you once held, and find myself in also in the same position where trying to get Sacramento to understand what is happening here at the border and the significance of it and why the state should be involved and care about this is still a struggle. I guess as new administrations come and as new legislators come, you've got to educate them. And so that brings me actually to the next question. I would assume then that, like me, you think this is this conversation that we want to have with this gathering that we're hoping to have, or that we will be having here in September, is still meaningful, and you think it's still important, I assume.
Yeah, having spent so much time in the public sector, and I was in business for myself before, if you call making movies being in business, and before entering into the legislature. But then I went back into a variety of business roles after, including dealing in multiple countries. We restructured things like the Commission of the Californias while I was there. We kept changing the deck chairs, so to speak. There's a tremendous amount of involvement in the academic community infiltrated into those elements. There seems to be, and I don't mean this and mean that that's a bad thing, but candidly, if you don't engage the people who are actually living the economy, and both in this context of workers as well as employers and job creators on both sides of the border, and in particular those people whose businesses involve both sides of the border, you're really just kind of spinning around in academia. And unfortunately, most of our efforts, in particular the formal ones like Commission of Californias, have frankly not been very productive. They're good to be there. That's good to build relationships. But the same thing that you see happening in Sacramento happens in Mexico City. And because there's another fire that's immediate in terms of their problems, and the borders always last. It's just one thing you can be absolutely confident of in, probably in every country, except where perhaps you have more hostile circumstances on borders. Borders are always last. It would be the most easy way to understand it is go watch Hunger Games.
I would say the borders always last when it comes to problem solving, but when it comes to rhetoric or scoring political points, it's always first. It seems like, especially these days.
So the great thing about the conference, and it has a template and a model that we've used now for 20 years through Independent Voter Project, is it's an opportunity to bring people from who deal with the realities of this and just have conversations. It's not about lobbying. It's not about coming up with pieces of legislation. It's about really providing the opportunity for legislators to understand better how what they do in Sacramento or Washington or Mexico City or elsewhere translates into the real world. Everybody has the same goals. The divisions and differences of opinion we have are amplified, particularly in the political sphere, far beyond the reality. If you get people in the room and get them out of an environment where they feel they have to perform, you'd be shocked at how quickly people come to agreement.
Yeah, and really selfishly for me, making sure that my colleagues understand all of these things that you talk about is why this conference feels of significantly and important for me. And that's why we're inviting people from throughout the state, because we have the fortune, but also the misfortune of being at the very end of the state and as far away as you can possibly get from the capital. And we need to have legislators who understand the uniqueness, the livelihood, the fact that several 100,000 people every day cross the border from here over to Mexicali, that where we have thousands of trucks crossing on a regular basis, and that our regulations on trucks and air emissions have an impact to the region. So those are the types of conversations I'm looking for.
So, it's funny you mentioned that. Here's something I hadn't thought about in 20 years. When NAFTA was passed,
right.
There was a little notice provision that said that any state could assure that its environmental rules as far as truck emissions were followed, but they had to pass a resolution within 90 days of the passage of NAFTA. Only one state in the union did that. I carried the resolution. You know, reading the bills actually has some benefit, and it was literally clearly a provision that was designed to be missed or ignored. And then there were some folks in the trucking community, but they were kind of cranky with me. And so ultimately, though, I ran into a guy who ran one of the largest Mexican truck facilities that was bringing stuff over. He says, the best thing you ever did for my business was make us clean up our trucks. So sometimes these things aren't apparent. The easy thing isn't always the right thing to do. But look, the moment now is different than it's ever been.
Right.
It's back to where we had hoped we would head in that era where NAFTA was first brought about, and then things diverged. The amount of investment in Mexico declined as American companies made the determined to go way offshore. Nearshoring, as the term is currently being applied in terms of trying to bring back those elements of the production cycle closer to home, is a great opportunity for Mexico, northern Mexico in particular, and for California. And that's happening. And
so I want to ask you about that, because we had a guest on talk about what that means and the conflict that nearshoring and having NAFTA, or now USMCA, NAFTA 2.0, but in the backdrop we have Made in America, right? And how that seems to create a conflict. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts as to how can those two coexist? Because I think there's perhaps a tension there that might be...
Shouldn't be, because it should be made in the Americas. It is. There's no conflict. There is no reason. Even let's say that a person philosophically is really focused in on the Made in America and is concerned about pressures on change and demographic change. What better way to ameliorate your concern if you think that the border pressure of population and people coming across the problem is to improve the work environment on the Mexican side of the border? And the better Mexico does, the better for America. And I just literally can't see any reason why any American would want to choose continuing to pour investments into what was China and Taiwan is now increasingly Vietnam and elsewhere, which is fine. But we saw up close and personal and are still experiencing the consequences of these long supply chains. It's just a practical solution to having cheaper, higher levels of quality. Look, I remember, I can go back many years ago, and there'll be a lot of naysayers that are my age or older who recall efforts, for example, when Rohr went to Mexico and began trying to, and ultimately it was a failed effort, and they had quality problems. And that's what, at the end of the day, is going to determine in that supply chain cycle whether this works or doesn't work. It's going to be a matter of quality adherence, and that can happen. And I know it happens. I can tell you a great AT&T story. For years, people complained about cell signals going back over the border. I got a visit from AT&T representatives, and they told me they were very excited because they were going to go down to Mexico, and they were having a meeting already scheduled with the telecom companies in Mexico, and they had decided to donate equipment to them. And I kind of looked at them. I said, you do know that all these guys went to the same engineering schools you went to, that run the same thing. They pretty much know what they're doing. And what do you exactly you think is going to happen? And Well, bottom line, they came back about 2 years later, and they had put all this equipment down there. And this was a business competition. If people say the signal from the Mexican service worked better than the American service, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're going back and forth across the border, which one are you going to buy? So all they did is use the
That's
equipment.
That's why I became a T-Mobile subscriber.
Well, exactly. And now, right. And now, what,
now
20
all
years
there.
later, right, they're working together. And that is the answer to your prior point about made in America. It's all America. And it's we benefit, the Mexicans benefit. Same thing, we go back to that environmental issue. We ought to be investing on both sides of the border, and we'll come out ahead.
Specifically, what do you think Southern California and Baja California could do at a state level, given that the border is often a nationalized, federalized issue, and it is, but what can we do to really improve our environment, our way of living?
Well, there's one issue that just jumps off the page, and because of the way the government is structured in Mexico, it's more of a federal issue for them, but it's a regional and state issue for us, and that is the Colorado River. We're all participants in the Colorado River Compact, including Mexico, in terms of having rights. And San Diego's in a unique position because of legislation which I carried about 20 years ago that allowed us to enter into a conservation agreement. It's the largest water conservation program in the history of the world. And what we did is San Diegans paid for conservation measures in Imperial Valley in agricultural areas, lining of canals, bringing in different kinds of irrigation systems. As a result of making those investments, we freed up water that otherwise would have been used in growing those crops, and we got those water rights. So now, instead of being last in line in terms of the seniority of rights on the river, we share being first in line with Imperial. Then comes Coachella, then comes the Metropolitan Water District, but also in that group is Nevada, Arizona, and Mexico. Mexico's probably number one problem in terms of sustaining its growth and we talked about quality control a moment. Water's just fundamental to being able to operate in a quality context, either in lifestyle or in manufacturing, any other. And right now, Mexico is relying on a combination of efforts to do the best they can with it, but they actually have water rights on the Colorado if we did a better job of conservation that would free up fresh water. Now, we all got lots of ideas about reclamation things, and it's very popular, but it's also horrendously expensive. The QSA water, the Quantitative Settlement Agreement water that we get in San Diego today, is the cheapest water we get. It's fresh water. It's senior rights water, and we pay, blended maybe $800 to $1,000 an acre foot for that water. The water we get out of the desalinization plant.
Was it 3,000?
Yeah, three for that. The desal, the reclaimed water, pure water program, City of San Diego and East County has their own. That's going to be no less than $6,500, maybe $12,000 an acre foot. Massive investment. Now, we can do the same kinds of things, the same principle of conservation and reuse. And what is another thing that's underspoken about is what's the first use? You want the first use to be the least demanding, so that when your reuse is simpler and less expensive. If we took that concept and we included Mexico in the conversation, we could provide for not only the current levels of agricultural, industrial, and home use for water, keeping in mind that agriculture consumes 85% of the water in California. So when you think you're going to conserve your way out of problem, you have to understand it's all at agriculture. The rest of it is politicians dancing on a pin. So it's all about agriculture. We could supply the entire western United States and all of northern Mexico's needs for less than half of the water that is the current allocation of the Colorado River if we simply applied the same principles that San Diego and Imperial already proved works.
And even though Mexico's only got a small percentage of those rights, it would be that significant.
A huge amount of water for them, but there's so much potential in this approach. We could actually get more water. Because remember, those rights, when you say so much rights, it's a matter of position. If there's more water, then they get even more, right? Mm-hmm. There's not a cap.
Sure.
Right? So when we set out to get conservation out of the Imperial Valley, we ended up producing more than 100% more water than we thought we were going to produce, which is why we now are in the enviable position in San Diego of actually being the only jurisdiction in California that actually has not only enough water, but some people are complaining we've got too much.
And so that would require federal participation as well.
It doesn't require federal on our side, but it does. I mean, they do. They kind of oversee the process. This is what they call a 7-party agreement.
Right.
It's a contractual agreement between the participants, of which Mexico is one. So it definitely requires federal participation on the part of the Mexicans. It would certainly require that the Secretary of Interior, who has emergency powers, which probably would have been exercised, but for the incredibly unexpected wet winter.
Yeah.
You know,
Even
which I call God's sense of humor. If you talk to any scientist, any bureaucrat, any so-called expert in the water world, and ask them in December of last year, is half of what ultimately happened possible? They said, no, can't happen, not possible. Not. Yeah. It's science.
Yeah. Well, before we run out of time, I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about more, because I heard you mention, and California's changed. When you were in the legislature, we definitely had a more divided legislature where bipartisan efforts were important and significant to getting almost anything done. It's no longer like that in California. I, however, feel I just had a vote on a bill where without the Republican vote, I actually would have, my bill would have died. And so I do think that there still is value in these conversations across the aisle with people. Can you share with me about your perspective about where we are in California and why those conversations are important from people who represent, other Californians in other parts of California?
Well, first of all, when you're as old and weathered as I am, you realize that nothing is permanent. The last people who will see change coming, and it's always this way, are the politicians. I was a staff guy when the Democrats had a 2/3 majority, and in one election, suddenly the Republicans were in the majority. It was the Prop 13, and believe me, none of us saw that coming. It'll change. It's 100% certain. It'll change. Is it next week? Is it 5 years or thing? But things move around and change, and it may change into things we haven't seen before. I don't know, but. Whether you're talking about the economy, the political system, one of the reasons why as Independent Voter Project we promoted the open primaries is that we're big believers in the notion that competition is healthy for everybody, open ideas. And so a political system, no matter how hard the people in it try, that isn't diverse intellectually, ultimately fails because it implodes on its own sort of narcissism. And that doesn't make people on one side of the conversation, the other side of the conversation, the good guys or the bad guys. It's just who we are as human beings. But what I think is most interesting is the juxtaposition of where California sits versus the politics of the rest of the country. And you see it right here in California, because you see the differences in the communities as you move away from the coast. I sort of half kiddingly I'll say that in San Diego you start entering America when you cross Highway 805, and I don't mean that to be disparaging either to California or to America. It's just a difference and it's not a difference in politics. We talk about it in the difference of the political elements, but those politics is an extension of culture. And when the politicians and the government, you look through the eons of human history, when they start moving beyond the politics and the economics of the short-term existence and the conversation delves deeper and deeper into culture, right, wrong, that's when governments get shaky and things get difficult. We're probably in for some more tumultuous times, certainly some unexpected times. And folks in the political space shouldn't expect to move with any more certainty than folks in the weather predicting and rain space are today, when they're sitting there scratching their head and figuring out why were they so wrong about how much rain was possible in any given year. And incidentally, they've also been wrong about how that was going to be absorbed into the environment. You're going to see, and then at some point, they're going to start telling the truth about the length of impact. Right now, the narrative is, well, you only picked, this is just 1 year, we need blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, it is only 1 year. It's not doesn't mean everything's going to be fine and dandy, but it gives the people who want to sit down and get a rational solution for the Colorado River a good 4 or 5 years, not 18 months. And because people were so locked into what they thought was going to be a political solution driven by crisis, both the bureaucrats and some of the nonprofit, some people kind of plugged into that, are having a hard time letting go of the narrative, which leads me to the bottom line. If I could give, one last piece of, if we could extract ourselves from one narrative, people talk about it in the context of right, left, but the divisions are a function of governance by hysteria. We have real problems. Some of them have timelines on them. But one thing you can be confident of, that whenever you attempt to approach a problem from the perspective that we got to do something right now, and you're going to end up causing more problems than you cause, and then you solve. Many of our problems in the modern world are the product of science and engineering and learning to be able to do things. The solutions to the problems created by those problems are science and engineering and technology and learning to do things. And bringing that expertise to the table and providing a way of transition from different economic dependencies to new economic dependencies is really the job of the politicians. It's not to figure out what the solutions are. It's to figure out how not to displace and destroy lives as we transition to a future. And we're in that space forever as a species. It'll never change. There are always going to be problems. There are always going to be new things and new challenges. And that's why our kids are going to end up having wonderful lives, because they're going to end up seeing challenges we never thought could even be contemplated. And they'll fix them. They'll challenge them.
And some of those challenges seem to be coming sooner or quicker, right? We're facing these challenges that sometimes maybe were longer periods of time. The solutions, as you said, are more complex, which requires more, I think, thoughtfulness instead of knee-jerk reactionary, which often is what scores political points for people. And that's why you hear that type of rhetoric, and because some people are successful in getting elected and reelected that way. But the real problems do take time. They do take conversations like this one and others that we hope to have at the conference. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you, to share with you, and look forward to having you part of the conference.
Great. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Stick with us. We'll have more conversations like this one here on Politic Deli.
One of those moments that I will absolutely never forget. It was definitely a career highlight, and just an emotional highlight.
Detectives made a big break in the case. Holly was found, alive and well, raised by parents she knew were not biologically related to her, according to the NCMEC.
It's Holly Miller here. Holly! They called for her, and we thought, oh my gosh, this is it. Wow, we feel like we know her so well, and we're about to probably just rock her world.
Listen to former Sacramento DA Anne-Marie Schubert on Inside the Crime Files. Visit olismedia.com and subscribe today.
Hi, I'm David Alvarez, your guest host here on Politic Deli. We'll be talking about our Make It with Mexico conference. We'll have guests and opportunity to share about what happens at the border, why it should be of interest to everyone, not just those of us who live in the border, and how we can work together to have conversations about this issue. So it's really an honor to be here, and I have a special guest now that will be sharing his perspective. I had the opportunity to meet now Senator Jones, then Assemblymember Jones. Actually, spent some time with him in Mexico. We were in Mexico City, I remember that, talking about issues related to our border economy, why our thriving Cali-Baja region is so significant and important, the jobs that it creates, and why we should invest in this relationship. So it's really an honor, Senator Jones, to have you here and to know that you're interested in continuing to have these conversations, which have been so important for our region. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Assemblymember. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to first start off by talking about a little bit of your history.
Okay.
Actually, I've worked with you now as colleagues in the legislature, but prior to you being in the legislature, tell me about what you were doing and your history here in San Diego and your interaction with the border just generally.
Right. So before I was elected to the Assembly in 2010. Before that, I was on the Santee City Council and had a couple of different small businesses. Most recently, before getting elected, was commercial. I worked in commercial real estate and worked in a very boutique firm that specialized in representing churches and nonprofits in leases, land transactions, sales, purchases, building sales and purchases, building leases, and really enjoyed that. But as I was serving on the Santee City Council, getting more and more frustrated with Sacramento, there was an opening in 2010 to run for Assembly. I did, and I ran for Congress in 2008 and lost. And so I already kind of had the team together, already had built up some name ID through that congressional race, and then ran for the Assembly, won in 2010, got sworn in. And then the original district that I had in 2010 went from the border, East Otay, so everything east of Chula Vista, up until Imperial County, so everything in San Diego, to the border, to Idlewild. And so I had to start getting up to speed on the border issues and cross-border transportation, cross-border business transactions. I'm not an expert, but I'm doing my best to keep up to speed on it.
Yeah, well, it's great to have someone who's not directly from the border region, but you had the opportunity to represent that. But the region is really beyond the border, and I think you recognize that. It goes deep into San Diego County, and the impacts are felt.
Right.
And so
I might have to admit here, because somebody will probably call me, I do have some personal experience in college with crossing the border several times while I was in my college career.
As we all have, especially if you're you're San Diegan.
We moved here in 1978, back to Colorado when I was in high school. I finished high school in Colorado, but then moved back here to go to San Diego. I graduated from San Diego State in 1991.
One of several proud Aztecs in the legislature.
There's a lot up there. And actually, a lot of Sacramento folks, lobbyists, staffers, department people, for the state from San Diego State. San Diego State has a lot of influence in Sacramento. It's actually pretty incredible.
Yeah, we're at a good point. So you are a Republican who's in the legislature,
right.
And oftentimes the rhetoric about border unfortunately falls into partisan lines.
Right.
We've been really lucky here in San Diego, where regardless of party, we've had mayors, we've had leaders in the civic community and business community across the board who it really didn't matter what their party was.
Right.
We've really been working together to make the border a better place. Can you tell me about your perspective coming from a party that often does get into the rhetoric, but there's a different reality in San Diego? How did you become aware of this unique difference of San Diegans who believe that the border is not just what we hear on national television?
Right. And I think that's an important distinction to make. And not only am I a Republican in the Senate, now I'm the Republican leader, minority leader in the Senate. So the influence has increased a little bit. If there was more Republicans, then my influence would have increased a lot more, but we're working on that. But I was kind of eased into this, actually. In Santee, I have a couple of manufacturer constituents that have businesses in Santee, headquartered in Santee, that also have manufacturing in Tecate. And then when I became the Assembly member, there's businesses in El Cajon, there's businesses in Escondido, and other places in San Diego County that also have manufacturing in Tecate, or some in Tijuana even. And so as I'm dealing with these constituents and recognizing that there's a lot going on here that most, I don't think, most Americans don't know how much is going on across that border between American companies and companies in Mexico that truly rely on it. They couldn't exist without each other. And so as I became more and more up to speed on that, and then I got to give Senator Hueso some credit for reaching out to me on some of his cross-border trips and symposiums that he's done, and he made a concerted effort to reach out to me to include me in some of that stuff. And really, that's when it kind of springboarded and really took off from there.
Do you recall from your days on Santee what the companies, what were they building in Tijuana? Was their headquarter here in the East County of San Diego? Were they doing research and development here and then the manufacturing there? Or what was sort of the dynamic?
Both, actually. The one company is a bioscience company. They develop pregnancy kits and other medical testing kits. And they do some of the research and development and manufacturing in Santee, and they do some of the manufacturing and research and development in Tecate. The building that they have in Tecate is one of the most high quality, because everything has to be super clean. The air,
FDA approved.
Yeah, all of that FDA approved, and they have to keep immaculate facilities, and they have a kitchen there for all of their employees, and it was really a great experience going down there. And then, of course, I think most people know Taylor Guitars, one of the largest acoustic guitar company in the world, I think, has a big manufacturing facility in Mexico as well. I haven't toured their facility yet, but
that's on the list.
Might be worth doing.
I want to ask your honest opinion, because I visited some of those facilities as well, and I honestly was surprised at the quality of everything, quality of care, all of the facilities, the amenities for the workers. Were you surprised when you first visited?
I think there was a couple of things that were surprising. Yes, I wasn't so surprised at how clean it was going to be, because that should be expected, right, of a bioscience company. But what you said did surprise me, how well they take care of their employees. And their employees, we walked all over the building. We probably interacted the day I was there 20, I probably personally spoke to 20 employees out of maybe 100 that I saw. And they're all thrilled to work there. The company provides, like I said, meals, I think at least one a day, maybe two a day. They send them home with gift packages for the holidays, and have really invested a lot into their employees, because they can't have a lot of turnover when you're working in a bioscience and you're working in research and development. Your employees have to be satisfied and content to stay there. So they work really hard to make sure that they do that.
Well, and they learn really specific skills that you want to keep them. You want to keep training. That's interesting. I was talking to someone who was in the business world and I've asked other guests about this, this national sort of this dialogue about made in the USA, versus you're talking about two very successful companies that a lot of their products are actually not made in the USA, but they are American companies, but they're made in Mexico. Make It With Mexico is the theme of the conference that will be hosted here in September in San Diego-Tijuana region. Can you share with us your thoughts about that? We're both in politics, and we all do want to see good jobs in America.
Right.
But this is a little bit different. It's unique.
Well, I've got a somewhat of a little bit of a long story to tell on that perspective. When I was in the Assembly, a manufacturer here in Carlsbad came to us, and it's Venturi. They make a aerator for red wine, and it's manufactured in Carlsbad. And they ran into some trouble with being able to call it made in the USA, their product in the made USA. And then as we started researching this, Maglights, who is headquartered in Ontario, the high quality aluminum bodied flashlights that law enforcement and military use, waterproof, all that. They were running into some problems with using the label made in the USA or made in America. As we started looking at this, it was really weird. 49 states and the Federal Trade Commission agreed on what made in America meant. One state didn't agree and had a private right of action attached to that, where you could sue the manufacturer if they didn't use that label correctly. I'll let you guess what state that was or is. So California. And in all the Federal Trade Commission allowed for some parts to not be made in the USA and 49 states to still use that label made in the. Now there wasn't like there wasn't a definitive percentage. It kind of through the courts, it came up to about 75 to 80%. As long as 75 to 80% of it was made in the United States, then you could say made in America or made in the USA. California, it had to be 100%. Or you, as a consumer, you could sue the manufacturer, not just for damages, but for punitive damages as well. So, for example, in the case of Maglite, or Venturi first, the aerator, the whole thing's made in the United States except for the black band that goes around the middle of it. I don't even remember where that was made. Just one little plastic piece is what kept them from being able to call they got sued for multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the plaintiff was awarded punitive damages, and they were represented by an attorney from the Consumer Federation. So in Maglite's case, they were sued 2 or 3 times. They knew the law. They packaged made in the USA flashlights to go to Canada. Somehow those flashlights came back into the U.S. market in California. Somebody bought a $35 flashlight, said made in the USA. They knew that they weren't allowed to use that label in California, sued them. And I think the plaintiff in that case was awarded $2 million.
Wow.
And on a Maglite, there's 2 pieces out of the whole thing that are not made in the United States. The O-rings that seal it and the light bulb, which is not legal to manufacture in America, anywhere in the United States. They're made in Germany. And the owner of Maglite went to the step to even buy the company in Germany to move it to the United States so they could have everything made in the United States, and then found out that whatever elements are in that light bulb aren't allowed to be manufactured. You can have it in the United States, you just can't manufacture it in the United States. So I've got a lot of experience with the whole controversy over the made in the USA. And I think I could get to the point personally, back to make it with Mexico, is, okay, well, let's find some balance. And I think, a lot of Americans, once you get the PR out there, public relations, of the quality of things that are being produced in Mexico, the made in Mexico, if we're going to make that into a branding, I think that could work. It might take a little bit of time to get some buy-in on that, but if we can find some branding that combines the U.S. connection and the Mexico connection, I think that would have some possibility.
Well, it sounds
if
like
that's what you're asking. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking.
Well, it sounds like your interest obviously has initiated, at least, with business interests and all of that. Can you tell me about why you're interested in this conversation of this conference? What's appealing to you, or why is it worthwhile for anyone to spend time learning about why this Mexico-California relationship matters? I think first and foremost it's based on the reputation of IVP and IVC. They do a great job with the other conferences that they host that I've been to. And I'll give you, for example, the Hawaii trip that gets a lot of static in the press about legislators. And so I was a little bit concerned the first time I went to that conference. And as soon as I got there, everything is so professional from the very beginning, like from the check-in in the hotel lobby to the welcoming reception that evening. And then that Monday morning, you're right to work. And I think that's what a lot of people don't expect to hear at one of these legislative conferences, is that there's actually work getting done. And whatever time we have to be down there, 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., you cannot be late, or Dan Howell will come and find you and drag you down to the meeting. So that's somewhat figurative and somewhat reality. Yeah. And so and I've been to that conference now a couple of times, and I've taken the heat in the press for doing it. And you know what? I just came to the conclusion it's worth it because real work is getting done. Real conversations are happening between people that are having problems with the government in California and those of us that are the policymakers in California, having an off-the-record conversation and kind of having the opportunity to get real with each other, right? Which we don't always have the opportunity to do in committee. Mm-hmm. Now, for the public's sake, and they need to know from this, is when those ideas come out of these conferences and they are brought into the legislative process, everything is done in the open
and everything's has the light of day on it. When they're going through the committee hearings, both sides have the opportunity to interact with the entire committee, and even before whatever legislative idea has come out of that, before it gets to the committee, as a chair, as a vice chair, both sides are able to get in touch with us, have meetings with us, and all the members of the committee.
So obviously, it sounds like you've found these worthwhile for sure.
Right.
Now, you were talking about California issues just in general. There's a little bit of a focus on this one, a little bit of a twist, if you will, and an emphasis on the border region.
Right.
You have spent time understanding this issue. What do you think? You think it's worthwhile for people to come to this specific conference, which is different than the other one, with this focus, and why would it be worth someone's time and investment given how busy everybody is?
Well, I think two reasons why it's going to be worth their time and investment. For me, I'll just use my experience with Mexico. I didn't know that much about it, right? I thought I knew. And until you actually dive deep, actually you don't have to dive that deep. Once you just kind of get into it and start paying attention, then all these issues start to become aware of them. And there's a lot more issues with the border than just what, like you've said, than we see on national television. National television, national media is going to pick on the most divisive, most controversial, most what they call newsworthy issue, so that they can get clicks, likes, and views on their social media and on their broadcasts, right? Well, these issues may not be like that, but these are real everyday issues that people need to get their arms wrapped around. So the first thing is to become aware of what's going on for those people that may not know how much is actually happening on that. I think if you asked 120 legislators, what's the busiest land port in the world? I don't know how many of them would guess Tijuana, San Diego, right? And maybe we should do that. And you've asked most San Diegans. I don't think most San Diegans know that that's the busiest land port in the world. And that's a big deal. And we've got to wrap our arms around that. And then the second thing I think it could come out of it is having you and me, and others like us that are on other opposite sides of the aisle, supposedly, although you and I both work nonpartisan very well. But, let's get some of the partisan folks down there and see what's going on. And, the folks in your party and the folks in my party, I can promise you their perspective is off a little bit if they've never been down there and never studied this. And to be quite frank with you, we have influence with the national policymakers. And if all of us can come together and speak with one voice as best we can to our national policy makers, then we can start shifting the national conversation as well.
I agree completely with you. We had a Republican administration, presidential administration, just reauthorized NAFTA, or what we call USMCA now, right? Mm-hmm. And that was led under a Republican administration and ratified by a Democratic Congress.
Right.
But Washington is so far, and so is Mexico City, which is the capital of Mexico. They're so far from our border region that I really appreciate what you said. Like, we can help be a voice to other leaders within our parties who maybe think that having trade and having opportunities with Mexico, in the case of my party, is not good because jobs are potentially going somewhere else. But those are jobs that are not supplanting, but really helping enhance our economic growth and other jobs here in the U.S. In your case, the Republican side often talks about immigration and undocumented and all that. Right. But what we know here is, as you said, the busiest land port of entry, over 140,000 on a daily basis cross the border with their documents to work, live, spend their money, do something here. And a lot of people don't know that.
Right, exactly. And, we've just got to, I think one of the things that you and I and others need to focus on also is our successes that we've already had on the cross-border. So, expanding the Otay East cross-border, or just the Otay crossing to begin with. And then, probably the single biggest thing that blows my mind that was able to be accomplished is the cross-border express. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you park on the United States side of the border and walk through that building onto the Mexico side of the border and get on an airplane and fly anywhere in Mexico that you want to fly, and it's not like you never
People don't believe it exists.
Right.
Honestly, when I tell them about it.
Right. And it's like, every time I cross the line because it indicates where the border is, right? I'm like, how did this happen? How did we get, and fairly quickly too, how did this not get bogged down like every other project that we tried? If you just built something on the American side, I think it would have taken longer than that. And if you just built something on the Mexico side, it would have taken longer. So whatever stars aligned at that point in time to first of all, get it approved, and second of all, find a way to get it built, and then join two countries together. I don't know if that's done anywhere else in the world than the cross-border express.
I think my understanding is that there's a crossing like that somewhere else in Europe, but I don't know where. But I think you bring up a good point that, and I was around that time, and we approved this at the city council back in my first year in office, but it was civic community or business community on both sides of the border. It was the elected officials, local, state, and federal on both sides of the border going to our respective governments saying, this is something we want to see happen. And we got to see more of that. And
do you know who is credited with the original idea?
Who?
No, I'm asking. I don't know.
Well, there was an idea of the twin airports.
Okay.
But this dates back a long, long time.
Okay.
The idea was to build Brownfield, which is an airport on the U.S. side, and Rodriguez Field on the Mexican side in Tijuana, and make them twin airports.
Right.
And connect them. And that was sort of the big vision that was in the 80s and maybe before that never came to fruition. It was really GAP, which is the Grupo Aeroportuario from Pacifico, which is the concessions in Mexican airports there's concessions for the airports that are privately held entities, and they really were very involved with that. But there was also some investments from, I believe, in the Chicago area. So it was again, it was business people who had an idea, who I think we should, always acknowledge that when you're looking to make money, because it does make money, we should acknowledge that too, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You can get really creative,
right?
And solutions can get more creative than we sometimes have in government.
Well, I would like to encourage the listeners to this show, if they've not used the Cross-Border Express, make up, and you don't have any trips to Mexico on the docket, make one up just to go fly down to Cabo for the day and fly back, just so you can use the Cross-Border Express.
You can get to Cabo. We just started looking at the prices because we might be going there. You can do a round trip for like $150.
Yeah, that's great. And we went to La Paz, and I think that was the same. And from San Diego, you can't get to La Paz.
No.
Easily. You have to fly to, I think, Texas and then back, and you're going 5 hours out of your way for a 2-hour flight.
Well, there's a reason why that Cross-Border Express is now expanding. They are growing. The expectations of their usership, like they were way under. They lowball that. It's been tremendous growth. Millions of people literally cross every single year, and they come from the whole state of California.
What's amazing to me is I know people that fly into San Diego and then take an Uber from the San Diego airport to the Cross-Border Express to fly out of Tijuana. Yeah. That takes some doing to do, but it's worth it. Yeah. These folks have figured out that it's worth it. So, one of the conversations at some point in time maybe we need to have is, how do we speed up getting people from San Diego airport to the Cross-Border Express?
Well, I think some of us have had some thoughts on that in the past, and connecting things like rail, and one of the reasons why, there's a lot of reasons why, we don't have to get into this, but why the high-speed rail has been problematic for our state. But there is no connection to our natural connection with Mexico. That would have made a lot of sense.
Yep.
Well, I want to make sure I get a chance to ask you about how you see us in Sacramento helping to elevate these issues. I believe, and why I'm a part of this, Make It With Mexico, in this conference, is that we need to start by doing the things that you said, which is helping to inform our colleagues who are from, those of us down here, we're at the very end of the state. We've got 118 or so other legislators that don't spend much time down here.
Right.
So beyond this conference, which I think is critical and why we're inviting people from throughout the state, what else can we do in Sacramento to make sure that Sacramento is paying attention to this?
I think the more legislators we can get in a bipartisan fashion to participate in this, the more legislators we have that are capable and willing to separate themselves from the national conversation that isn't productive, right? And so, look, the national conversation is going to happen. The national policymakers are going to do what they do, or nothing, like they have done, I think. And the more of us from California that stay California-centric on this, the more positive we'll be able to get done. But the best, and so we'll get stuff done, and then you're able to remove yourself from the rhetoric on your side. I'm able to remove myself from the rhetoric on my side. We're able to meet in the middle, I guess, for lack of a better term. But I would like to say meet in reality and come up with policies that actually make a difference for people. And the more of us that do that, then the more of us are able to, when we have somebody stand up on the floor of the Assembly or stand up on the floor of the Senate and repeat the rhetoric that's coming out of DC, you and I know, okay, that rhetoric may have an element of truth in it, but the entire package of rhetoric is not productive and or helpful or most often truthful.
What gives you hope that we can reach that?
I think we've made great progress over the last 6 years on this, and I think again, going back to IVP and IVC, their reputation and their ability to put on these conferences and leading them they're very definitive on what they want to accomplish. They're very proactive in making sure that the conversations continue to move in that direction. They don't let it just become jungle ball, for lack of a better term, in the conversations. They're very disciplined on making sure that the legislators and the other participants are having productive conversations. So that's one of the reasons why I remain hopeful. And the other, we've had successes. We can point to things that we've already done that show us we can get this, the Cross-Border Express and other things that we can get things done.
I agree. I'm hopeful for that as well. I'm really hopeful that you are a colleague in the legislature and that you are helping bring others along as well. So Thank you very much, Senator Jones.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. I'm David Alvarez. I've been your special guest host here on Politic Deli. It's been an honor to share the opportunity to talk to Senator Jones, former Senator Steve Pease, civic and business leader Juan Hernandez. They have all shared incredible knowledge and experience about being here on the border. Really looking forward to that type of conversation happening at our conference, Make It with Mexico. When we first talked about this and this idea came up, it was about how do we get other people to understand what the border really is like? And from our three hosts, I think you heard a perspective that really is unique, that speaks to why we're excited about the opportunity to bring other people from California here to the border region so that they can learn about and live a little bit of the experience that we've had, those of us that have the honor of being here in the border region. As a representative of the border myself in Sacramento, I'm looking for allies and I'm looking for colleagues to help me in this work that I started when I was on the city council representing the border region. Dynamic region with over 140,000 people who cross at our border crossings here in San Diego alone, a couple 100,000 throughout the California ports of entry, millions of people who cross every year into the Tijuana airport from San Diego into Tijuana through Cross-Border Express. These are all things that are happening that make this region really dynamic, and why I'm so excited about the opportunity to share with colleagues and with other people from throughout California. We're looking forward to seeing you at our conference, Make It with Mexico. Please visit independentvoterproject.org for more information.
Thanks for listening to Politic Deli. Be sure to follow and subscribe whenever you listen to your podcast. To read the blog associated with this episode, visit olasmedia.com. This episode was produced in studios located in San Diego, California, and Tijuana, Baja California. Ulysses Breton is creative director. Our sound engineer is Alan Glespar. Lena Alvarez is co-producer. Serving as executive producer and co-founder is JC Polk, and Chad Peace is president and co-founder. Olas Media is an IVC media company.
Olas Media.